Hey guys, welcome back to Smart Simple Fit. My name is Davin, and today I'm going to be doing a response to a video made by Dr. Mike over on Renaissance Periodization, where he did a critique of the fitness program that was used to get Bradley Cooper jacked and stacked for the film American Sniper. Before we get into it, I should say that I'm actually quite fond of Dr. Mike,
one of my balls out and hit it with a hammer to punish
and
myself.
I often have recommended his channel to my audience. Now, as much as I do have respect for Dr. Mike, there are some key things that I disagree with him about, but nonetheless, Mike is a great resource, so I recommend you go subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. You might be thinking, who's this guy? And who does he think he is to critique Dr. Mike's video? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm smaller, weaker, and probably dumber than Mike, so if you want to click off this video, now's the time to do it. All right, let's jump right into it.
Hey folks, I'm Dr. Mike Israel. Today I'm going to look at Bradley Cooper's training for his seminal role in American Sniper, a movie that I really like. Let's find out how much science there is and spread the science away from the not science. There's a term for that, it's called BS.
So as you can see, there's already a heavy theme of science in Dr. Mike's video. If you've seen some of my videos, you know that I'm not a big fan of exercise science in general. I don't think it's necessary to refer to studies when building an exercise program. So even if this program is unscientific, what exactly is a scientific program? I talked about this recently on my podcast with Sam Sheethar. What exactly counts as evidence-based? At what point is something science-based or not? Since there are plenty of studies that contradict each other. And there are plenty of ways to misrepresent and misunderstand even the same study.
I'm Jason Walsh. I'm a trainer in Los Angeles, and I get actors ready for movies.
Jason, hello. Quite handsome. What am I saying? I mean it.
We literally have to sit down and figure out what the characteristics are of that role, the variables involved, meaning like, are they going to be in the desert? Are they going to be carrying heavy weight? Next.
You're going to train someone differently because they're going to be in the desert? Does that mean like more unstable training for slipping on sand?
They're going to be carrying heavy weight, an exoskeleton.
Going to be carrying heavy weight, an exoskeleton. You mean like a prop?
I have to say, I agree with Mike so far. This is a pretty trendy thing that personal trainers will do. They'll really exaggerate the uniqueness of an exercise program to make it sound like, oh, this is going to get you ready to be a desert combat warrior or some other thing. Now that being said, can you make nuance to a program for someone who wants to be a dancer, like up in the top right corner there, versus someone who's supposed to be a soldier? I suppose there would be some differences maybe in the physique or the activities they're prepared for. Other than doing specific activities, yeah, it's more about building the body up in a general sense, so you don't have to exaggerate the unique benefits, and I doubt that these unique exercises prepared him to be a Special Forces Navy SEAL. Sure, he's going to have to look jacked to look the part, but you can get jacked a number of ways.
Believe it or not, what we're doing is really helping these guys with character building. I want to enforce that character. I want them to feel
What we're doing is really helping these guys with character building. Your job, sir, is to just get people to look a certain way and maybe be able to physically perform stunts and other things.
So again, I overall pretty much agree with what Mike is saying here, although I will say, you know what? If you take the training in the right direction, I think it could help people get into character. If you're going to be a soldier in a film, going through an actual boot camp style workout in the uniform, rucking with some gear on, yeah, I think that could help develop someone get into that mindset. And if you guys think back to roles like Ben Affleck's Batman, where he's doing this kind of like basement style workout, he's swinging a sledgehammer, he's flipping tires, he's climbing ropes, he's doing pull-ups, like to get into kind of this like raw mindset of how Batman would train, where it's about brute force, minimal equipment. Does it really help him get into the role as Batman versus doing machines? I don't know if that would make a big difference on his character, but you know what? It looks cool nonetheless. And also, I can think of at least one really good example where the way people trained helped them get into character. Now, I don't know how Dolph Lundgren trained for Rocky IV or even how Sylvester Stallone trained, but you could see the training styles being contrasted against each other in the film Rocky IV actually played a key role in highlighting the differences between the East and the Western systems. The very scientific, micromanaged style of training versus the raw hard work and grit of the American Rocky. And I think it makes for an interesting comparison even today. I'll even explain it to clients, hey, what we want to accomplish is more like what Rocky was doing rather than Ivan Drago, not because machines don't work, but because if you micromanage every aspect of a program to death, you lose some of the art of training and some of the passion. So I think there are instances where the training style is reflective of character development. But overall, again, this is something that just sounds really good, so probably wasn't that relevant to Bradley Cooper's fitness program.
Bradley Cooper came to me through John Krasinski. He got this big role, 225 pounds, military guy, highly respected and decorated. Bradley Cooper, 185 pounds wet, novice, never trained like this before.
So far I'm sold. Yes, he needs to gain weight.
The first 8 weeks that we were doing 2-a-days, I mean, we had a lot.
2-a-day training to gain weight. Curious. Very advanced. Well, I kind of want to see what he's doing here.
I decided that this was the move, the trap bar deadlift, that we were going to pretty much make the foundation of everything.
Okay, so the trap bar deadlift off of blocks is a movement that comes close to being the worst possible exercise you can do for putting on lots of muscle safely. Why? It trains so much of the body at the same time that there's no specific muscle it pushes to its limits and thus elicits a lot of muscle growth. The leverage position you're in is to be able to lift the most weight that you possibly can with your body. So in order to stimulate a lot of your muscles so diffusely as to not stimulate any of them really well, you need to impose the maximum amount of spinal loading. And that just seems like a risk-reward ratio. In addition to that, by doing only partial reps at the top end of the movement, you are avoiding entirely the deep, painful stretch at the bottom of almost every exercise that causes the most muscle growth. This is a preposterous choice for this movement. Holy
So personally, I disagree very strongly. I think that the trap bar deadlift is, number one, a very safe movement, number two, very good at putting on muscle. Now, he made a comment about doing it from a reduced block, which would force you to use a much heavier load and therefore load your spine more. Yes, but if you think about the position that he's in, it's not exactly a very exaggerated amount of hip flexion. So sure, the load is higher, but because the range of motion is reduced, the way his spine is being loaded with that weight is not nearly as exaggerated of an effect if, let's say, he was doing a Romanian deadlift where the weights don't touch the ground at all, and sometimes people go very deep, especially if they're doing some kind of a deficit deadlift or deficit stiff leg deadlift. That is an example of an exercise that would put much more load on the spine directly. So it's not just about the load, it's also about the position. Now, as far as hypertrophic outcomes, I disagree very strongly here with Dr. Mike because hypertrophy, it's very simple. You guys know this intuitively. It's about hard work. It's not about deep stretches. Yes, you can go deeper, and that may help you develop your muscles in a well-rounded sense, since the reason why you have 4 quads or a short head and a long head to your biceps and triceps, the reason why you have these anatomical differences is to help you move in different positions and throughout different ranges of motion. So it stands to reason that doing deep stretch exercises helps you have a more well-rounded physique, probably be less prone to injuries, just look more jacked and be stronger in general. But it's not always as simple as less range of motion equals less gains. It comes down to per set effort. Where you lack per set effort, you must do more sets in order to make gains. I talked about this in my lecture on exercise variables. If you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you go check it out. But basically, when you're using less range of motion, you're going to have to use more of something else to get the same effect. In this case, it might be load or repetitions with the same load. Or when you use more range of motion, you have to cut the repetitions with the same weight or just use less weight for the same reps. It's that simple. It doesn't mean that going deeper is always better. It doesn't mean that Joel Seedman is right and that 90-degree partials are perfect. In fact, I'd recommend, styles of training that look much more similar to how Dr. Mike trains versus how Joel Seedman trains. But even a Joel Seedman program, if done consistently, I hate to break it to you guys, it would still get you jacked.
There's 2 variables here that I can play with, and that is the range of motion.
Yes, you're playing with it wrong.
We started safe, and we started at a high position. We started light.
Starting at a low position is not unsafe. It just feels icky because you're weak.
As I see him progress and get better, we can take those down. So we got Bradley really strong.
This could have been worse. He could have just done partial deadlifts the entire time. Although really he is doing partials the entire time, as I still see that it's elevated. Bradley did do the partial deadlift in the movie. I do remember that as his character. And I scoffed at it then, and I continue to scoff at it now.
Even though I wouldn't use this specific recommendation where you'd have someone start with block, pull, trap bar deadlifts, and then decrease the height, I have used a similar method with other exercises with clients in the past to great success. When someone has very tight hamstrings, very weak hamstrings, poor muscular control, or struggles with the coordination of the hip hinge movement pattern in general, it's like many people have talked about this, Bald Omni-Man and many others. The hip hinge is a difficult skill to perform. I'm sure Dr. Mike's even talked about this. It's difficult to hip hinge properly. So if for a period of time you used a reduced range of motion on a Romanian deadlift, a conventional deadlift, or in this case a trap bar, that could be a helpful tool to make sure that people have good muscular control, good breathing, good glute activation, and by that I just mean they get used to squeezing with their glutes, nothing fancy, and good overall muscular development, and get some basic muscular development before you try those more advanced ranges of motion. I think starting with a partial and working your way down is often a strategy that makes a lot of sense, especially in instances where I have clients who have torn their hamstrings in the past running or something like that, or individuals who have injured their hips or injured their backs. Starting with a partial range of motion can be one of the most gracious things that you do to your body. So I have to disagree with Mike. It's not always the case that it feels icky because you're weak. Sometimes you're weak and injured. Sometimes you're weak and tight. But for a number of reasons, you want to graciously work your way into that larger range of motion. Yes, so that they can eventually get more out of the same weight or more out of less weight. And also so that they can more proportionately develop those muscles and become more athletic in general.
You would be better off just starting him at a very deep range of motion. It would have provided more of a muscle growth stimulus so that he could gain more actual muscle and less other stuff that we're not interested in gaining.
We actually ended up towards the end of it lifting a little over 425 pounds.
425, that's good. From an elevated position, I don't know how elevated it was. It's good. It's not amazing, but 3 cheers for Bradley, Cooper, and Trainer. That's very impressive.
Okay, so again, this is a misnomer. This is a misunderstanding. Going deeper doesn't give you more gains. Working harder than yourself by comparison in 2 scenarios where you can recover from both amounts of work, working harder than yourself gives you more gains. Working harder can be accomplished through doing additional reps, doing additional weight, doing additional range of motion. All of these are ways to challenge yourself by comparison, but in the abstract, range of motion and stretch doesn't grow you. You can do 10 very deep body weight squats with your heels elevated. I don't care who you are, that's not enough to grow muscle, generally speaking. But if that same person just went to parallel with 150 pounds on their back for 10 reps, guess which one is going to elicit more growth? The one that has a drastically higher load and therefore would demand a drastically higher effort for the same number of reps. So saying he's going to gain instantly more muscle by going deeper, I think that has not been demonstrated really ever whatsoever. So I disagree very, very strongly with that idea. And then he also says he would have gained more real muscle instead of other stuff. I hate to break it to you, Mike, he was gaining muscle the whole time. Whether or not he was gaining muscle in the right places is another story, or whether or not the fatigue of using this heavier weight from an elevated position, whether or not that was worth it as a trade-off, that's a discussion worth having. But guess what? From start to finish, with an exercise like this elevated trap bar deadlift, you're going to make great gains if you put in the work.
Coming in the mornings, 6 a.m., we would train for an hour, hour and a half. He would go home and recover. He would come back. We'd do a lot of the volume training in the afternoons.
What the hell is the first training for? If volume training, or training the muscles with a sufficient stimulus in order to get them to grow, is the onlyest type of training that you need to put on muscle size for a Hollywood role. Any other training you're doing is interfering with that.
Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say, it is possible to do this type of training effectively. In fact, I may very well put out a free program based on this template with a trap bar deadlift even, and this style of working out once that's maybe more strength focused and then more volume focused in the afternoon. We don't have a ton of detail, so we're not really sure based on this video what percentages and rep ranges was he working with, what exercises in the morning versus what percentages, rep ranges, and exercise he was doing in the afternoon. But let me just give you an example just for the sake of argument. Well, you could do a bro split, and on that first day, let's say for example he does barbell overhead press in a 5 to 10 rep range, let's call it strength training. He could warm up 1 to 2 sets, warm-up sets, then he could do 2 sets in that 5 to 10 range, and then later in the day, when he comes back, for volume, for the same movement pattern, for the same muscles, to get more hypertrophy in the relevant muscles, with a reduced stress on the body and joints, he could do a seated, back-supported dumbbell overhead press with a higher rep range, slower reps, paused reps, really focusing on rep quality and stability, so that way he can get extra volume with less of the stress on the lower back and things like that. Especially if it was something like a bro split, yeah, you could use that to great effect. But that being said, even if it was a different style of split, where it's more like a day 1, day 2, push-pull legs, you could still manage this with the exact same style of training. You could have that heavy bench in the morning, and you come in and do dumbbell bench and pec flies as volume training. You could absolutely do that and make it work. And I think I'm going to make a program to demonstrate that.
Week 4 at 3,500 is a very good surplus. He should have just been doing that the entire time. And week 5 at 4,000 is probably just putting on a lot of fat and not much more muscle than 3,500 would. That's my best guess. Week 6, 4,500 to just make you feel like shit and get even fatter. Amazing. Okay, so we got a little bit of insight on mostly just the partial deadlift that was happening there with the hex bar. Terrible movement for hypertrophy, maybe one of the worst. Not to take anything away from the gentleman that is the trainer. I'm sure he has great success and is all in Hollywood and shit like that. But folks, go to school and learn things. 4 out of 10 out of the kindness of my heart for that workout scene. American Sniper was great.
So, as I've pointed out in many of my videos, just because someone is formally educated or has a list of qualifications does not mean that they are going to be a competent individual. I can tell you from experience, most of the people I went to college with, no offense, I would not hire them to work for me as another coach, and I certainly would not hire them as my coach. Sam Sheethar had a very similar experience where he said, these are great people I went to college with, but I'm the only one of them that I would trust to make an exercise program. So the idea that being formally educated equals being good at exercise programming, I think that that's really silly, and it's really not confounded in experience. It certainly wouldn't be confounded in research either. But the point is, guys, you want someone who has lots of experience and a jacked physique. The guy who was making this program looked reasonably jacked. He had a shirt on, so it's hard to appreciate a physique with a shirt on. But you know what? Yeah, he looked like he was in reasonably good shape, and I could understand the logic, what he's trying to say. Would I have had Bradley eat nearly as many calories, and would I have him, obsess over this partial range of motion deadlift? No, probably not, but you know what? I'm confident this program worked well for him, and I have no idea whether or not Bradley was on PEDs or not, but either way, if we knew more about this program, I'd be willing to give it a rating myself, but I tell you what, I'd probably give it higher than a 4 out of 10. I think it would be pretty decent. It's just like any program. If you do it consistently and train it hard, it's going to work. All right, so I hope you weren't too offended by my disagreements with Dr. Mike. At the end of the day, Mike is still a very knowledgeable guy, so I respectfully disagree with him. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please drop a like, and I'll see you guys in the next one.